Shalom, I'm Mark Regev. I'm speaking to you from the Jerusalem studios of the JNS, and I'm with my co-host Ruthie Blum, and we're together bringing you another episode of Israel Undiplomatic.
Hi, Mark. It's good to be back again. First of all, before we start, I would just like to request of our listeners and viewers to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. But more importantly, JNS's inaugural International Policy Summit is happening this April in Jerusalem. Click the link in the description below to request your registration.
Well, Ruthie, it's a solemn day in Israel today because the Bibas family, the mother and the two children, the baby and the infant, are being buried today after being returned from Hamas, by Hamas from Gaza. Very sad day. In many ways, the Bebas family has become a symbol of all the hostages. And the story that happened with the mother Shiri about the Hamas delivering accidentally, supposedly the wrong body, which I don't think anyone really believes was an accident. In the end, we got the right body and they're being buried. And for the family who must be going through pain that we can only imagine, it's a difficult day, but at least they now have closure. And today's funeral follows yesterday's funeral on the same, from the people from the same kibbutz, near Oz. We had the funeral yesterday of an 80, in his 80s, Oded Lifchitz. And I was listening very carefully to the eulogies of his friends and family. And what struck me the most, and I think we should never forget this, that people eulogizing Oded Lifchitz talked about that he was a long-time kibbutznik. He was one of the founders of the kibbutz, and he was committed to peace with our neighbors, and he was personally committed to do everything he could to encourage some sort of reconciliation with the Palestinians. And his eulogizers talked about how he would actually go to the border with Gaza, pick up Gazans, especially families of children who are undergoing medical treatment at Israeli hospitals, and take them to the hospitals. And he'd done this for countless Gazan Palestinians. And yet, as one of his eulogizers said, that didn't mean anything to Hamas when they crossed the border and massacred and raped and beheaded and did everything that they did. Hamas, doesn't distinguish between Jews according to their political perspectives. It doesn't distinguish between Jews. Did they vote for Netanyahu or did they vote against Netanyahu? Are they for judicial reform or against judicial reform? Are they religious or secular? Hamas killed all Jews that they could find on October 7th. That's their ideology. That's who they are. And I think Oded Lifchitz's eulogies should be a wake-up call to anyone remaining that has any illusions about what Hamas is, what Hamas stands for, and what is Hamas's ultimate aim. And I said this on this program a few months ago. Hamas butchered 1,200 people on October 7th. Had they had the capability, would they have booked, instead of 1,200, would they have butchered 12,000? Would they have butchered 120,000? And the answer, of course, is yes, yes, and yes. This is who we're up against. And I think this should serve, as I say, as a wake-up call for anyone who has any illusions about who's Israel, who our enemy is.
Well, I certainly agree with that. But where you and I part ways, perhaps, is that pinning this all on Hamas. There's the bogeyman, Hamas. And we have to face facts that Hamas is like the Nazis. They don't distinguish between one Jew and another, between a settler and a kibbutznik, a left-wing kibbutznik, and all that's true. But let me tell you something. On October 7th, there were many, many, many hundreds of quote-unquote civilians from Gaza who came in on the third wave through the fence and committed atrocities. And let's not forget the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria, who's you could say that their leader is a terrorist in a tie, but he's a terrorist nevertheless. That is why Israel is conducting operations, counter-terror operations in Judea and Samaria right now. We cannot, it's not merely that we have to annihilate Hamas, which we do. And it's not merely that Hamas is evil, which it is. But we have to face facts that there is no coming to a peace agreement with any Palestinians today until they are de-radicalized, their education system changes, or if ever, it'll take at least 2 generations before that can happen. Rather than becoming more modern with each interaction with Israelis, and that includes working in Israel, getting to know Israeli families, getting to know how many left-wing Israelis, all they want is peace and a 2-state solution. Instead of growing more friendly towards Israel, they've grown more hostile. So I think that is where you and I maybe disagree, and I think we should stop focusing solely on Hamas. Gaza is filled also with Islamic Jihad terrorists, Fatah terrorists, and all kinds of other groups who are happy to commit those kind of atrocities.
So, of course, I agree and I disagree. I agree when you say that in the foreseeable future, the chances of peace between Israelis and the Palestinians it doesn't exist. Yes, and all those people around the world who say 2-state solution, it's really not on the card today. I was at a conference yesterday at Tel Aviv University, and they had the leader of the Israeli left. Yes, he gave an interview. Yair Golan, who leads the what used to be the Meretz Party and the Labour Party, which have united. We spoke about this last week. And once again, and he consistently, he refuses to talk publicly about a 2-state solution. And a few years ago, the leaders of Meretz and Labour, of course, would talk about a 2-state solution. And so I would say to people, if the Israeli left doesn't want to speak about a 2-state solution today, yes, and a lot of their voters were people on these kibbutzim, yes, there's a huge problem there. And I agree with you. People around the world who are sort of lecturing Israel 2-state solution, they don't understand reality, right? It's just not on the cards today. Doesn't mean we can't do other things. I believe it's possible to make peace and advance peace with our Arab neighbors. With the Saudis, I think there's hope. They're expanding the Abraham Accords. I think that a lot of energy can be put into that, and that can yield positive results. But the idea that somehow there's a breakthrough with the Palestinians anytime soon, I mean, that's just daydreaming. Where I do disagree with you is I have no illusions about the Palestinian Authority. And I'm aware of their incitement, and I'm aware that they've paid a slay, that they actually have given financial incentives to people to commit terrorist atrocities. I've got no illusions about what they teach in their schools and all this. But just as, there's a difference between different enemies, and not all enemies are the same. There was a difference between Germany in the First World War and Germany in the Second World War. They weren't the same. I believe there are differences when you look at the Palestinians. And the most important thing that Israel can do today for peace and for our own security, I believe, is to thoroughly destroy Hamas's control over Gaza, to destroy their military machine. Because if there is a second and third wave of Palestinian civilians who were supporting Hamas on October 7th, who were committing terrible crimes against the Jewish people, against humanity, rapes and so forth, murders, mutilations, they thought that Hamas was winning. And when Hamas is winning, their brand goes up and their popularity goes up. By thoroughly defeating Hamas, we will discredit them as an ideology and maybe somewhere in the future hope a more moderate, rational Palestinian political sensitivity to emerge.
Well, listen, the truth is, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. The distinction between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas in Gaza is like the distinction between Jack the Ripper and the Boston Strangler. Yeah, you might say that Jack the Ripper, killed people with more blood and the Boston Strangler just strangled people, but I do not see it as a distinction. That's one thing. Second of all, it's not that we just have to eradicate Hamas. We have got to forget about the Oslo Accords. We have got to dismantle the Palestinian Authority. Why do you think no Arab country wants President Trump's plan to relocate all Gazans? Why do you think that is? No Arab country wants Palestinians within its own borders. They don't want it because they know who the Palestinians are. It's only Jews who spend all this time apologizing for them. What the Arab countries do is pay lip service to, oh no, Israel is at fault for, that's what the Palestinians need more money, more work permits. They need an agreement with Israel. It's all baloney. They are desperate to keep Palestinians out because everywhere the Palestinians are, they commit, let's put it this way, they do damage. I was going to use worse words than that, but I'll leave it at that. And we have to be careful, by the way, because if by some miracle this plan comes to fruition and you have a Palestinian state in Jordan and partly in Egypt, Israel is just as much in danger because our biggest border with an Arab country is Jordan. And then we'll have a terrorist Palestinian state along our longest border. And that is even worse than having it in Gaza. So we're in a tricky position. But I just think we should stop with the illusions. And by the way, just one more point about the conference yesterday and the head of what he calls them, the Democrats, ironically, Yair Golan. He didn't mention two-state solution because he's trying to be politically savvy. He knows the Israeli public doesn't want to hear it, not because he doesn't believe in it, or more to the point, he thinks that a lack of it is Israel's fault, not the other side's fault. And that, I think, is what the line drawn between the far left and the right in Israel is that the left still blames us. Blame Israel first, no matter what it is. And that includes blaming us for the October 7th massacre, either for causing the Palestinians to hate us or for also ignoring the signs that they were about to invade southern Israel.
I think that's also part of a larger question, which is, why is it always Israel's fault for many people abroad? And I think even you'll hear in places in Europe and so forth, yes, Hamas does the most brutal things, right? We spoke a moment ago. They beheaded, they raped, they mutilated bodies, they took all the civilians that they did hostage and so forth, terrible crimes. And so people in Europe, they say, or that they deny the crimes. They say, oh, this is all exaggerated, it's not true. And we can talk about that in a moment if you like. Or they say, what did those terrible Israelis, what did those despicable Zionists do to turn the Palestinians into such killers? And unfortunately, and here we should know that though October 7th was a day that, to paraphrase President Roosevelt, a day that will live in infamy, it wasn't the first example of Palestinians butchering innocent civilians. I've been reading my history, yes, there were such massacres, maybe not of the same scope, but the killing of innocent civilians, the mutilations, beheadings, rapes, it goes back to the 1920s. The most infamous case is the Jewish community of Hebron, which was massacred and forced to leave the city in 1929. And this wasn't Zionist settlers. This was a community that had been living there for centuries, right? They were killed because they were Jews.
Well, exactly. That's been my point all along. And it's very hard to persuade people who are spending all their intellectual capital showing what they call is a genocide in Gaza, for example. It's interesting. It's the only genocide we've ever heard of where the population has grown. But aside from that, we have, well, it brings me to this question of, is Israel making its case properly, or is there any point to making a case if there are so many anti-Semites around who aren't interested in hearing the facts? And that, you worked for many years presenting Israel's case to the media in various forms, as an ambassador, as a spokesman, and also in the Public Diplomacy Directorate when the war began. The question is, is there any benefit to spending our time trying to persuade the world of the justice of our cause, or about what happened on October 7th, etc.?
So sometimes you can get very frustrated and think there is such, a preconceived anti-Israel, anti-Jewish ideas out there that you're just blowing against the wind, right? But you should always remember that Israel has many friends around the world, and they need to hear the arguments. And to just strengthen your friends is in itself, we would say, in Hebrew, that's a mitzvah. That's a good thing to do, right? If you can, even if you're not going to win, strategically, at least you're going to help give strength to Israel's friends. And maybe some of the people who are watching you on television abroad, you make them think, you challenge some previous preconceptions. Are you making a strategic difference? I don't know sometimes, yes. But I think you have to never give up the fight. For people like Herzl, Jabotinsky, Zionist leaders around the world, over history, the idea that make the case for Israel is something you can't give up on. You have to you've got to fight to protect yourself physically, but you've also got to fight to protect yourself morally. And you've got to stand up for what you believe in and what is right. And even if only a few people are listening, you've got to make your case. And public opinion goes in ups and downs, yes? Israel used to be very popular across the West. There was a time, even in Ireland, which today is in many ways a bastion of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish feeling in Europe, yes? The Irish are terrible when it comes to Israel. But when we were popular, there was a time in the 1940s that everyone in Ireland liked Israel, not because they particularly liked Jews, but because the Jewish underground here, Mr. Begin and Mr. Shamir, were attacking British soldiers. And so the Irish said, oh, well, if they're fighting the British, they must be good, yes? Then if you actually read Irish newspapers at the time, we were very popular. A Palestinian intellectual, I don't know if you've ever read his book, Sari Nusseibeh, writes on the eve of the 1967 war. He was with his brothers in London, and they were searching for a pro-Arab event because public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive of Israel. And in the end, they came across an event, and they went to it, and he discovered it was a Nazi event, a neo-Nazi event. And that was the only thing that they could find in London at the time that was pro-Palestinian, pro-Arab. And so public opinion comes and goes. Today's progressives probably don't know it, but in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, progressives were very, very pro-Israel, and it was the right-wing oil companies, yes, and their conservative allies that were the Arabists. So I think if one has a historical perspective, we can know sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. The most important thing is to fight for what is right.
Well, there's no question about that. But here's our problem. Israelis are divided as usual, as Jews are, as human beings are, but Jews are especially have a reputation for being divided on everything, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But this became especially blatant after October 7th, when there was, I'll give you the best example, an argument over whether the video, the 47-minute video of Hamas's atrocities on October 7th, should be widely disseminated or only shown to specific people, to groups invited for that purpose, because it is a horrific video. And by the way, the footage was all taken by Hamas terrorists boasting about their atrocities. So the decision was made not to disseminate it widely, so that, first of all, so that the people in the videos, the families of the victims, it was offensive, and it was, I would say, their right to privacy had to be respected. And also, we didn't want that film to become some kind of snuff on the internet. However, what happened in the wake of that. Although it didn't take 5 minutes for people to say, no, there were no rapes. No, it didn't happen that way, etc. And now fast forward to today. The same thing is happening with the Bibas family. The IDF spokesman, Daniel Hagari, the other night gave a press conference in which, and I won't repeat what he said because the Bibas family has since said, don't talk about it. But he described how the Bibas children and their mother were actually murdered by their captors. All right. And he gave a detailed description based on the autopsy. Now, afterwards, Prime Minister Netanyahu repeated that in a speech he gave. And then the Bibas family, through a lawyer, sent a letter saying, don't talk about those details. It's offensive. It hurts us. It's our privacy. And we need to have and we will decide who gets to talk about the details. So on the one hand, we all are mourning with the Bibas family, and we have spent all of this almost year and a half, the whole world, as you said, it's a symbol. We've all wept for those babies and been on their side. And now to say that we can't show the world or tell the world what actually happened to them, which is an example of making Israel's case or proving how grotesque Hamas, and not only Hamas, the civilians who captured innocent Israelis, etc. So we're never going to even agree on what public diplomacy we decide to adopt. Let's put it that way.
So I remember the debate, and of course I saw the 47-minute video of the atrocities numerous times because I went back to work for government at the time, and it was, we asked foreign visitors to watch it, and we couldn't ask them to watch it without watching it with them. I think there's a serious debate about what would have been the advantages and the disadvantages of putting out the video publicly, putting it on the net. Does that make it cheaper? Does it not make it cheaper? I understand the debate. But I would question those people who would argue that this would have, changed, been a game changer or something like that. It would have affected public opinion and so forth. I urge caution because, it's like Holocaust denial. People who want to deny the atrocities will deny the atrocities no matter what proof, no matter what evidence, no matter what pictures and what video you have. And they'll say it's AI, or they'll say it's Israeli manipulation, or they'll say these people are paid by Israel. There'll always be something they'll say, right? To minimize. Very serious people, supposedly serious people, have denied the atrocities, right? We know how international women's organizations looked at the rape of Israeli women, how they had to be forced to admit it happened. And then, of course, they moved on very, very quickly afterwards. So I think one has to be realistic about what is possible and what is not possible. I wanted to say something more about the man who was buried yesterday, Oded Lifchitz, who was a founder of Kibbutz Nir Oz. Kibbutz Nir Oz was the left-wing. There were a number of kibbutz movements in Israel, and he was from the most left-wing one, the Kibbutz Artzi, which was related to the Hashomer Tzair movement. And these people were the left, yes? In the 1950s and even into the 60s, they had this soft spot for the Soviet Union and for that sort of authoritarian socialism. Yes, though in Israel they were always democratic, but they had internationally, yes, famously when Stalin died in 1953, they had a day of mourning, yes, and they were wrong about that. At a time they supported a binational state, yes, which was never going to work. But though they could have been wrong on some of the issues, no one can deny the fact that these people were Zionists. Nir Oz was established, I think, in 1955 on the border of Gaza when it was a violent border, when there were terrorist attacks across the border every day. These people had very left politics, but I don't think anyone should doubt their patriotism and their commitment to Zionism and to Israel. There are literally more than 100 kibbutzim in the Kibbutz Artzi movement, many of them on Israel's borders in the north or in the south, or in the old days what used to be the center. making a big conclusion. There's even a joke about kibbutz artsy, and like all jokes, a successful joke always has a base in truth. They have a place for Arab-Jewish coexistence called Givat Chaviva, where they do, conferences where Arabs and Jews get together and talk about how they have so much in common and we can work together. And so people joke, well, maybe they haven't really helped make Arabs and Jews make peace, but by teaching Arabic and things to Israelis, they've produced many successful intelligence officers for the Israeli military.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I've heard other jokes about such programs. And one of them is, it's great, Arabs and Jews get together and bash Israel together and they have it in common. But that's aside from that. I'm not questioning the Zionism of those kibbutz settlers. And I use that word on purpose. Why? Because many of those in 2005, when Arik Sharon pulled out every last Jew from Gush Katif, which is in Gaza, these kibbutzim were all for it. They were against the settlers there in Gush Katif, who were mainly religious, observant Jews. They put them down. They called them settlers. They accused them. They said two things, the kibbutzim. Two things they said. One was that the army shouldn't waste its energy on protecting just a bunch of settler Jews in Gaza, number one. Number two, they said they were an obstacle to peace. They called them an obstacle to peace, and it's all their fault that there's hostility, etc. Okay, every last Jew came out of there. I'm sort of still waiting to hear some of them say, wow, we hadn't realized that we're all settlers in the eyes of the Gazans, of the Palestinians altogether. We're all settlers. They don't care. They don't care that we were in Hashomer Tza'ir. They don't care if we have programs, and they don't care if this woman has a head covering and I don't. They don't care. I just would love to hear one apology or someone say, wow, we were wrong not to support those people there. They were on the border. They were protecting us. Now we became on the front lines. Haven't heard a single word about it.
So it did come across in the eulogies yesterday a bit that these people who did believe in peace, nevertheless, they moved, as I said, Nir Oz was created in the 50s in a difficult zone as part of settling the country. They knew they were on the border there. I think in the communities immediately on the border, you're right that they supported political parties and overwhelmingly they supported Sharon's decision to pull out. But I think there was also a serious conversation, what does it mean about their own future? I don't think there was only one opinion there. I think there was a variety. Though, let's be frank, when Sharon made his decision to pull out of Gaza, there was overwhelming support from the Israeli public. Everyone thought, it was like Sharon justified pulling out of Gaza by saying, they can go to hell, right? If they want, we're going to pull out of Gaza, and if they want to have a good relationship with us, we'll have gates, and we can have trade, and we can have tourism, and we can have commerce. And if they want to live in Afghanistan, right? Well, metaphorically speaking, then we'll close the gates and we'll just arm the border and we'll defend ourselves. But obviously, I think a lot of people who supported disengagement, what's happened in Gaza since has raised many questions as to the wisdom of that decision. And I just say the following. Sharon said, we're pulling out of Gaza because we want to be strong and we want to, it's a better way to defend the country. And most Israelis at the time agreed with him. But what is the truth? Just as when we pulled out of Lebanon a few years after that, Hamas saw it as a victory for their violence, for their terrorism. And they said, if we hit the Jews and we hit them hard enough, they'll move back. And I think that ultimately was part of the equation that was ignored. Even Fatah was telling us at the time, not because they like us, but because they hate Hamas. They were saying, you pull out of Gaza the way you're doing it, you're going to put petrol. What do you say in America? You say gas. in the car of Hamas, right? And so I think looking back on a lot of Israelis who supported disengagement at the time, I know you weren't one of them.
I certainly was.
No, you had family members who did. And the point being is this, that today I think that people look back at that mistake, look back at Sharon and say, did he make a mistake, right? That's the question.
Well, some do and some don't. But, that was a long time ago, and it's easy to then say, oh my God, we should have, we shouldn't have. I don't even want to go there, but I have to say, well, the real reason he pulled out, if I remember correctly at the time, was that there were suicide bombers coming in from Gaza. We were getting blown up all over the place, discotheques, buses, cafes, and Israelis were screaming at the government. They were saying, do something, do something. And the something he decided to do was to separate, okay, we're closing it off. We're closing it off with a fence, and one pebble comes over that wall, one shot fired, one pebble, and we'll blitz them. We'll go to war with them. I remember him saying that. And of course, I didn't believe that, nor did anyone of my friends who opposed this plan. And why? Because I knew, one foreign TV camera would be around the border. We know one pebble comes over the wall. We're not going to go in and go to war with them. And in fact, what happened afterwards, it's true that there were fewer suicide bombers. Suddenly there was a wall. They couldn't get in everywhere, right? We didn't have buses blowing up. And instead, we got rockets and missiles because it wasn't that Sharon, we have to be in fairness to Sharon, he didn't say we're doing this for peace. He didn't say, okay, we're going to have peace. No, he said this is for defending ourselves. But you're right. The Palestinians see Israel doing something to defend itself. It says, we're winning. And we can do anything we want because we don't have to follow any rules, not rules of engagement, not international law, nothing. And so we've seen how that happened. And by the way, when you say that most Israelis supported it, it's very interesting because Sharon's own party, Likud, did not support it. We had a what do you call it? Mishal Am. We had a
referendum.
A referendum in the party, and the party voted against it. And I remember because I was there. We voted against it, and so Sharon didn't like that. He didn't want us to vote against it, and so in the middle of the night, he formed a different party called Kadima, and then which
had, according to all the polls, first of all, the Likud divided 40-60, if I'm not mistaken. So a large part of the Likud did support it, and together with the center and the center left and others, yes, they clearly had a huge majority. At the time, I don't think anyone could deny that it had very strong support numerically.
No, it did. Oh, no, it absolutely did. I'm just saying, though, that he was disingenuous because he said, I'm going to let my party decide, and the party decided against it. So he said, okay, that wasn't the result I wanted.
I remember that, yes.
So let's go. That is what I'm talking about. You're right. Because Israelis, I'll tell you, this is the thing. What's beautiful about Israelis is also problematic. Israelis just think that everyone is like us. So for even Israelis who are fighting with each other, the thing is this. We believe in peace, and we think that people are just people, and they just want good. They just want to raise their children. I remember how I used to crack up when President George W. Bush, he's not the only one, but Americans, they use this term like, they're just moms and dads. And I said, to call Palestinian parents raising their kids to be martyrs, moms and dads, is just like you are on another planet, all right? And so, that's the thing. And we have to, and if October 7th didn't wake us up, there are many times we've needed a wake-up call, but if that didn't do it, I don't know what will.
So we have to finish because our time is running out, or has already run out. But I would just say the following, Ruthie. I agree with the Palestinian hostility to Israel is very entrenched. Anyone who knows the history of the conflict knows that there were numerous chances on the table for a peace deal, and the Palestinians always chose rejectionism, and they preferred not creating a Palestinian state if it meant recognizing the Jewish state. That we know from history. But I think with the right policies, winning the war, defeating extremism, working with Arab governments, maybe we're creating a new situation which will be good for peace, good for Israel, and maybe ultimately better for the Palestinians.
Well, let's certainly hope that you're right. It's going to be a while, though. And until next week, Mark.
I look forward to that. Bye-bye.